Isabella Martinez had been working as a maid at the Blackwood estate for 3 years, but she had never seen anything like what happened that cold October evening. The massive Victorian mansion sat on 50 acres of land outside Salem, Massachusetts, and most people in town whispered stories about the mysterious owner who was rarely seen during daylight hours. Marcus Blackwood was known throughout the region as an eccentric billionaire who had inherited the estate from his family. The locals called him the Vampire King as a joke, partly because of his pale complexion, and partly because he only seemed to appear after sunset. Isabella had always laughed off these rumors, thinking they were just small-town gossip about a wealthy recluse. That particular evening, Isabella was finishing her duties in the Grand Library on the second floor. The room was filled with ancient books, some dating back centuries, and the air always smelled of old leather and dust. She was carefully dusting the ornate wooden shelves when she heard the heavy front door slam shut downstairs. This was strange because Mr. Blackwood wasn't supposed to return from his business trip to Europe until the following week. Isabella quickly glanced at the antique clock on the mantelpiece. It was only 8:30 in the evening, much earlier than his usual arrival times. She had noticed over the years that he never seemed to come home before 10 o'clock at night, and often much later. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the marble foyer below, and she could hear him speaking to someone on his phone, in what sounded like an agitated tone. Curiosity got the better of her, and Isabella crept quietly to the top of the grand staircase. From her position, she could see Marcus pacing back and forth in the foyer, his long black coat still draped over his shoulders. Even from a distance, something seemed different about him tonight. His usually perfect composure appeared shaken, and his movements were more urgent than she had ever witnessed. "The situation has accelerated beyond our control," she heard him say into his phone. "I need all the arrangements moved up by 48 hours. Yes, I understand the risks, but we have no choice now." Isabella's heart began to race. She had never heard her employer speak with such intensity, and the conversation sounded far more serious than typical business matters. She knew she should return to her work, but something kept her frozen at the top of the stairs, listening to every word. Marcus ended his call and stood perfectly still for a moment, as if sensing something. Isabella held her breath, pressing herself against the ornate railing. Then, without warning, he looked directly up at her hiding spot. His eyes seemed to glow in the dim lighting of the foyer, and for a split second, Isabella could have sworn she saw something inhuman in his gaze. "Isabella," his voice carried up the stairs with an authority that made her knees weak. "Please come down here." Her legs felt unsteady as she descended the marble staircase, gripping the banister tightly. When she reached the bottom, Marcus was standing near the large oil painting of his ancestors that dominated one wall of the foyer. Up close, she could see that his skin was even paler than usual, and there was something wild and dangerous in his expression. "How much did you hear?" he asked, his voice eerily calm despite the tension she could feel radiating from him. Isabella's throat felt dry. "I wasn't trying to listen, Mr. Barker." "Blackwood. I was just finishing up in the library when I heard you come in early. I didn't mean to intrude." Marcus studied her face carefully, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he stepped closer, and Isabella caught a strange scent that she couldn't identify, something metallic and sharp that made her instinctively want to step back. "Isabella, I need you to understand something very important," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There are things about this house, about me, that are far more complicated than they appear. What you might see or hear in the coming days could be disturbing." She nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't just about protecting business secrets or maintaining privacy. This felt like a warning about something much more dangerous. Marcus walked to his desk and pulled out an envelope that appeared to be quite thick with cash. "I'm going to give you a choice, Isabella. You can take this money, enough to live comfortably for several months, and leave tonight. Find another job. Start fresh somewhere far from here. Or you can stay, but if you choose to remain, you must promise me something." Isabella's mind was racing. The offer of money suggested he was serious about wanting her gone, but something in his expression told her that he didn't really want her to leave. After 3 years of working in the house, she had grown attached to the routine and, if she was honest with herself, intrigued by her mysterious employer.
"What would I need to promise?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness.
"That no matter what you see, no matter what happens in this house over the next few days, you will remain absolutely silent about it."
"You will not speak to anyone, not your family, not your friends, not the authorities, about anything that occurs here." Can you make me that promise? The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Isabella realized she was standing at a crossroads that would change her life forever. The smart thing would be to take the money and leave, to walk away from whatever secrets the Blackwood estate was hiding. But something deeper than curiosity was keeping her rooted to the spot. She looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something that surprised her, a mixture of hope and fear, as if her decision mattered more to him than just keeping his secrets safe. In that moment, Isabella made a choice that would alter everything she thought she knew about the world. "I'll stay," she said quietly, "and I promise to keep your secrets." Marcus's expression shifted, and for just a moment, she thought she saw relief wash over his features. But then his face hardened again, and he nodded curtly. "Very well. But Isabella, you must understand. Once you've seen what I'm about to show you, there will be no going back to your old life. The knowledge will change you, and you'll become part of something much larger and more dangerous than you can imagine." As if on cue, the lights in the foyer began to dim, though Isabella couldn't see anyone touching any switches. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and she felt goosebumps rise along her arms. Outside, she could hear what sounded like wolves howling in the distance, though she knew there were no wolves in Massachusetts. Marcus walked to the large painting of his ancestors and pressed his hand against a specific spot on the ornate frame. To Isabella's amazement, the entire painting swung inward like a door, revealing a hidden passage behind it. The opening led to a stone staircase that descended into darkness, and she could feel cold air flowing up from below. "What you're about to see has been hidden from the world for over 3 centuries, Marcus said, turning to face her one final time. "My family has guarded these secrets through generations, and now you're going to become part of that legacy." Isabella's practical mind told her to run, to grab the money and flee from whatever madness was about to unfold. But her heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement that she had never experienced before. She had always felt like her life was missing something important, some greater purpose beyond cleaning and cooking and maintaining someone else's home. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, extending his hand toward her. Isabella looked at his pale, cold fingers and realized that her entire life had been leading to this moment. Whatever lay beyond that hidden doorway, whatever secrets the Blackwood family had been keeping, she was about to become part of it. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the shocking coldness of his skin against hers. "I'm ready." Together, they stepped through the hidden doorway and began their descent into the darkness below. Behind them, the painting swung shut with a soft click, sealing them into a world that Isabella could never have imagined existed beneath the floors of the house she had cleaned every day for 3 years. As they walked down the stone steps, Marcus began to speak in a low voice that echoed off the ancient walls around them. "Isabella, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen with an open mind. My family has been protecting this town, this region, for over 300 years. We've been guardians against threats that most people couldn't comprehend or survive. The staircase seemed to go on forever, winding deeper and deeper underground. Isabella could feel the weight of the earth above them, and the air was getting colder with each step. Strange symbols were carved into the stone walls, and she could swear she saw them flickering in the torchlight as if they were alive. "What kind of threats?" she managed to ask, though her voice sounded small and frightened in the echoing space. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, and she was surprised by how comforting the gesture felt despite the supernatural coldness of his skin. "The kind that hunt in the darkness, Isabella. The kind that feed on human blood and see mortal lives as nothing more than entertainment." Isabella's blood ran cold as the implications of his words began to sink in. All the jokes about him being the Vampire King suddenly didn't seem funny anymore. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that was both terrifying and impossible to believe. "But if you fight against those things," she said slowly, "then what does that make you?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her in the flickering torchlight. His eyes reflected the flames like mirrors, and when he smiled, Isabella saw something that made her heart skip a beat, elongated canine teeth that looked sharp enough to tear through flesh. "It makes me exactly what the townspeople have always suspected, Isabella. I am what they fear, but I'm also what protects them from things far worse than themselves." Isabella's world tilted as Marcus's words sank in. She stared at his fangs, her rational mind struggling to process what she was seeing. 3 years of working in his house, and she had never suspected the truth that was now staring her in the face with supernatural eyes. "You're actually a vampire," she whispered. the words feeling strange and impossible on her tongue. Marcus nodded solemnly, his fangs retracting until his smile looked almost normal again. I am. But not the kind from your movies and books, Isabella. My family and I are what you might call reformed vampires. We made a choice centuries ago to protect humanity rather than prey upon it. They continued their descent, and Isabella's mind raced with 1,000 questions. The stone corridor finally opened into a vast underground chamber that took her breath away. The room was enormous, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadows above. Ancient tapestries hung from the walls, and the space was lit by dozens of candles that never seemed to burn down. But what captured Isabella's attention immediately were the people, or rather the beings, that occupied the chamber. There were at least 20 individuals scattered throughout the space, and each one had the same pale, otherworldly beauty that she had always noticed in Marcus. They all turned to look at her as she entered, and she saw the same supernatural glow in their eyes. "Welcome to the Covenant," Marcus said, his voice carrying a formal weight that she had never heard before. "These are my family, Isabella. Not all by blood, but all bound by the same oath that has guided us for 3 centuries. A woman who appeared to be in her 30s approached them, though Isabella sensed she was far older than her appearance suggested. She had long auburn hair and moved with the fluid grace of a dancer. When she smiled at Isabella, her fangs were visible, but her expression was warm and welcoming. "I'm Sarah Winchester," the woman said, extending her hand. "I've been part of this family for 60 years now. Marcus has told us so much about you." Isabella shook Sarah's hand, surprised by how normal the gesture felt despite everything she was learning. "He's told you about me?" "Of course," Sarah laughed, and the sound was like silver bells. "You've been taking care of our home for 3 years. Marcus speaks of you often, always with great respect and affection." Isabella glanced at Marcus, who seemed slightly embarrassed by Sarah's words. She realized that in all her time working for him, she had never really considered that he might think of her as more than just hired help. An elderly man with silver hair and a distinguished beard joined their conversation. Unlike the others, he looked genuinely old, though his eyes held the same supernatural gleam. "I'm Professor William Chen," he said with a slight bow. "I've been studying the supernatural world for over a century now, both as a human and as one of our kind." "You weren't always a vampire?" Isabella asked, fascinated despite her fear. "None of us were," Professor Chen explained. "We were all human once, each turned under different circumstances. But Marcus's family offered us something rare in the vampire world, a chance to retain our humanity while gaining the power to protect others." Marcus led Isabella to a comfortable seating area where several other members of the Covenant had gathered. As they sat down, he began to explain the true history of his family and their mission. "My ancestor, Thomas Blackwood, was turned in 1692 during the Salem witch trials," Marcus began. "But instead of becoming a monster, he chose to use his new abilities to protect the innocent people who were being persecuted. He discovered that there were far worse things than accused witches threatening the community." Isabella listened intently as Marcus described a hidden world that existed alongside the normal human one. There were rogue vampires who hunted humans for sport, werewolf packs that had forgotten their connection to humanity, and ancient demons that sought to break through from other dimensions. "The Blackwood Covenant became the guardians of this region," Marcus continued. "We hunt the monsters so that humans can live in safety, never knowing how close they come to true evil every single day." A younger-looking man named David Rodriguez joined their circle. He had been quiet until now, but Isabella could see intelligence and intensity in his dark eyes. "The problem is that something has changed in recent weeks," he said, his voice grave. "Our enemies are organizing like never before. They know about our protection of this area, and they're planning something that could devastate not just Salem, but the entire eastern seaboard." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "Is that why you came back early from your trip?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I received intelligence that suggested the attack would come sooner than we anticipated. We have maybe 48 hours before they make their move, and we're outnumbered at least 3-1. Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "Isabella, the reason Marcus brought you down here isn't just to share our secrets. We need your help." "My help?" Isabella laughed nervously. "What could I possibly do against supernatural creatures?" Professor Chen smiled kindly at her confusion. "You underestimate yourself, my dear. You've been living in this house for 3 years, exposed to our energy, our presence. Haven't you noticed that you're different from other people?" Isabella thought about it carefully. Now that he mentioned it, she had always seemed to have better intuition than her friends. She could sense when people were lying, often knew when someone was approaching the house before they knocked, and had never gotten sick despite being exposed to various illnesses over the years. The proximity to our kind has awakened certain abilities in you. Marcus explained gently. You're what we call a sensitive, a human who can perceive and interact with the supernatural world in ways that most people cannot. David pulled out an ancient-looking book and opened it to a page filled with symbols similar to those Isabella had seen carved into the walls. These are protection wards, he explained. Only someone with your particular sensitivity can activate them. Our enemies won't be expecting human magic to be part of our defenses. Isabella stared at the symbols, and to her amazement, they seemed to pulse with a faint light as she looked at them.
You want me to cast spells?
Not exactly spells, Sarah corrected. More like awakening the protective energy that's already woven into the foundations of this house and the surrounding land. The original Thomas Blackwood had the help of a powerful witch when he established the Covenant. Her magic still exists here, but it needs someone like you to channel it. The weight of what they were asking began to settle on Isabella's shoulders. These supernatural beings, who could probably handle almost any threat imaginable, needed her help to save potentially thousands of innocent people. It was overwhelming and terrifying, but also strangely exciting. What happens if I can't do it? She asked quietly. Marcus's expression grew dark. Then tomorrow night, when the moon is new and their power is at its peak, an army of rogue vampires and their allies will sweep through Salem and the surrounding towns. They'll kill indiscriminately, turning some victims and draining others completely. By dawn, this entire region will be a supernatural wasteland. Isabella felt her stomach drop. And you really think I can help stop that? We don't think it, Isabella, Marcus said, reaching out to take her hands in his cold ones. We know it. The magic recognizes you. It's been calling to you for years, and you've been answering without even realizing it. Professor Chen nodded in agreement. Haven't you noticed that accidents seem to avoid you? That dangerous situations somehow resolve themselves when you're around? That's not luck, my dear. That's magic responding to your innate protective nature. Isabella thought about all the times over the years when things had worked out in her favor in ways that seemed almost too convenient to be coincidence. The time she had slipped on ice but somehow landed safely. Do wrong. The evening when a drunk driver had swerved away from her car at the last second for no apparent reason. The day when a gas leak in her apartment building had been discovered just minutes before it could have caused an explosion. The magic has been protecting you because it needs you, Sarah added softly. And now it needs you to protect others. Marcus stood up and walked to an ornate wooden chest that sat against one wall of the chamber. He opened it and withdrew what looked like an ancient silver pendant on a delicate chain. The pendant was carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as Isabella looked at them. This belonged to Eleanor Whitmore, the witch who helped my ancestor establish the Covenant, Marcus said, walking back to Isabella. It's been waiting for the right person to wear it for over 300 years. He held the pendant out to her, and Isabella could feel power emanating from the silver, like heat from a fire.
If you put this on, there's no going back. You'll be bound to the Covenant, committed to protecting this region and its people for the rest of your life.
Isabella stared at the pendant, understanding that she was facing the most important decision she would ever make.
Around her, the members of the Covenant waited silently, their supernatural eyes fixed on her face. She could feel the weight of their hopes and fears, and beyond that, she could somehow sense the thousands of innocent people sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of the danger approaching. Will it hurt? She asked, though she already knew her answer. Marcus's expression softened. The transformation is intense, but not painful. You'll still be human, Isabella, but you'll be a human with access to power that most people can't even imagine. Isabella reached out and took the pendant from Marcus's hands. The moment her fingers touched the silver, she felt a surge of energy flow through her body, like electricity. The symbols on the pendant blazed with light, and suddenly she could see things in the chamber that had been invisible before. Lines of power crisscrossed the room like glowing threads, connecting each member of the Covenant to each other and to the house above them. She could see the magical protections that surrounded the property, and beyond that, she could sense the dark entities gathering in the woods around Salem, preparing for their attack. I can see them, she whispered in amazement. I can see everything. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression was completely warm and human. Then you understand now why we need you, and why we've been waiting for you. Isabella clasped the chain around her neck, feeling the pendant settle against her skin like it belonged there. Immediately, knowledge began flowing into her mind, spells, protections, the true history of the supernatural world, and her role in the coming battle. "What do we do now?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. David stood up and began laying out maps of Salem and the surrounding area on a large table. "Now we prepare for war," he said grimly. "And we pray that your newfound abilities will be enough to tip the scales in our favor." As the Covenant began to plan their defense strategy, Isabella realized that her old life as a simple maid was truly over. She was now part of something ancient and powerful, something that would demand everything she had to give. But looking around at the faces of her new supernatural family, she felt a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. Tomorrow night would bring the greatest battle this region had seen in centuries, and she would be at the center of it all. The next evening arrived with an unnatural darkness that seemed to press down on Salem like a heavy blanket. Isabella had spent the entire day learning to control her new abilities under the guidance of Professor Chen and Sarah, while Marcus and David coordinated with supernatural allies from across New England. Isabella stood in the grand foyer of the Blackwood mansion, wearing dark clothing that would help her blend into the shadows. The silver pendant around her neck pulsed with warm energy, and she could feel the magical protections of the house responding to her presence. In her hands, she held an ancient leather-bound grimoire that contained the spells she would need to activate the town's dormant defenses. "Remember," Sarah said, checking the silver weapons strapped to her arms, "you don't have to fight them directly. Your job is to awaken the ward stones throughout Salem and maintain the protective barriers. We'll handle the physical combat." Through the large windows, Isabella could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the estate's grounds. The enemy forces had been gathering all day, and intelligence reports suggested there were at least 60 rogue vampires, along with a pack of feral werewolves and something that Professor Chen had grimly referred to as a shadow demon. Marcus appeared beside her with that supernatural speed she was still getting used to. "The ward stones are located at 5 key points around the town," he said, showing her a detailed map. "The old cemetery, the town square, the lighthouse at Gallows Hill, St. Mary's Church, and the original site of the witch trials. You'll need to visit each location and speak the activation words while touching the stones." Isabella studied the map, memorizing the routes between each location. "How will I know I'm doing it right?" "Trust the magic," Marcus replied, placing his cold hand gently on her shoulder. "It's been waiting for you for 3 centuries. When you speak the words, you'll feel the power connect. The stones will glow with white light when they're properly activated." David joined them, his expression grim. "Isabella, I need you to understand something. Once you activate the first ward stone, every supernatural creature in a 50-mile radius will know exactly where you are. They'll send everything they have to stop you from completing the ritual." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Isabella's chest. "Will you be able to protect me?" "We'll do our best," Sarah promised, "but we'll be fighting on multiple fronts. There will be times when you'll be on your own." Isabella nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The truth was, 24 hours ago she had been a simple maid, and now she was expected to single-handedly defend an entire town against supernatural forces. It would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Marcus stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "Isabella, there's something I need to tell you before we begin. The reason the magic chose you, the reason you're so compatible with Eleanor Whitmore's pendant, it's not just because of your sensitivity." Isabella looked up into his pale eyes, seeing something there that made her heart race. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor Whitmore was my ancestor Thomas's human lover," Marcus explained quietly. "She chose to remain mortal so that her descendants could one day inherit her magical abilities." "Isabella, you're her great-great-great-granddaughter." The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My family has no connection to Salem. We're from California. Your great-great-grandmother moved west in the 1920s to escape the family legacy," Marcus continued. "But the magic followed the bloodline. It's been dormant in your family for generations, waiting for the right moment to awaken."
Isabella stared at him in shock.
"So, all of this was planned? My working here, meeting you, everything." Marcus shook his head. "Not planned, but perhaps guided. The magic has a way of bringing the right people together when they're needed most." Before Isabella could fully process this information, the lights in the mansion suddenly went out. Emergency candles flickered to life automatically, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Through the windows, they could see torches moving through the darkness as their enemies began to advance. "It's time," David announced, checking his weapons one final time. Isabella, you need to reach the first wardstone before they realize what you're doing. Marcus handed her a small communication device. This will keep us in contact. If you're in serious danger, call for help and we'll find a way to reach you. Isabella tucked the device into her jacket and took a deep breath. The grimoire felt warm in her hands and she could sense the pendant against her skin growing brighter with magical energy. Around her, the members of the Covenant were preparing for battle with a grim efficiency that spoke of centuries of experience. Remember, Professor Chen called out as they prepared to leave the mansion. The shadow demon is their most dangerous asset. It feeds on fear and despair. If you encounter it, don't try to fight. Focus on completing your mission, and the wardstones will provide protection. Isabella nodded and followed Marcus to a side door that would allow her to slip out of the mansion unseen. As they paused at the threshold, he turned to her with an expression of concern and something deeper that she didn't have time to analyze. Isabella, he said softly, I want you to know that having you here, sharing our world with you, it's changed everything for me. If we survive tonight, there are things I'd like to tell you. Despite the mortal danger they were all facing, Isabella felt her cheeks warm. Marcus, Tell me after we've saved the town, he interrupted with a small smile. It'll give you extra motivation to complete the mission. Isabella smiled back, surprised that she could find humor in such a dire situation. Then Marcus opened the door, and she stepped out into the supernatural darkness that had engulfed Salem. The first wardstone was located in the old Chestnut Street Cemetery, about a half-mile from the Blackwood estate. Isabella moved through the shadows, using the enhanced senses that came with her newfound abilities to avoid the roving bands of enemy creatures. She could hear fighting breaking out behind her as the Covenant engaged the main assault force. The cemetery was eerily quiet when she arrived, filled with headstones dating back to the colonial period. Isabella searched among the weathered markers until she found what she was looking for. A tall granite obelisk covered in symbols that matched those in her grimoire. The moment she touched the stone, she felt a jolt of recognition, as if the magic remembered her. Opening the grimoire to the first spell, Isabella began to speak the words in what she somehow knew was an ancient Celtic dialect. The symbols on the stone began to glow with soft white light, and she could feel power spreading outward from the cemetery like ripples in a pond. The communication device crackled to life. First stone activated, she reported. I can feel the energy connecting. Excellent, came Sarah's voice, though it sounded strained. We're holding them at the main gate, but more are coming from the east. Get to the town square as quickly as possible. Isabella tucked the grimoire under her arm and began running towards Salem's historic district. Behind her, she could hear inhuman howls echoing through the night as the werewolves caught her scent. Her enhanced speed allowed her to stay ahead of them, but she knew they were gaining ground. The town square was located in the heart of Salem's tourist district, surrounded by shops and restaurants that were now dark and empty. The wardstone here was hidden in plain sight, disguised as part of the base of a statue commemorating the witch trials. Isabella pressed her hand against the stone and began the second incantation. This time, the magic came more easily, flowing through her like a river of light. The stone blazed with power, and Isabella could see ethereal threads of energy connecting it to the cemetery stone. 2 down, 3 to go. A sound like breaking glass made her spin around. 3 rogue vampires had appeared in the square, their eyes glowing red with bloodlust. Unlike Marcus and his family, these creatures looked monstrous, with elongated limbs and faces twisted into permanent snarls. The little witch thinks she can stop us, one of them hissed, his voice like grinding metal. We'll drain her slowly and use her blood to break the remaining wards. Isabella clutched the grimoire to her chest and began backing away, but more vampires appeared behind her, cutting off her escape. She reached for the communication device, but one of the creatures knocked it from her hand with supernatural speed. Marcus, she whispered, hoping the pendant would somehow carry her message. I need help. The lead vampire lunged at her with claws extended, but just as he reached her, a figure dropped from the rooftop above. David landed between Isabella and her attacker, his silver sword already in motion. The vampire's head separated from his shoulders in a spray of ash that disintegrated before it hit the ground. Go! David shouted, engaging the remaining vampires. I'll handle these. Isabella ran toward Gallows Hill, where the lighthouse wardstone waited. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of David's battle, punctuated by the inhuman shrieks of dying vampires. The lighthouse stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking Salem Harbor, its beam cutting through the supernatural darkness. The wardstone at Gallows Hill was the largest she had encountered yet, a massive boulder covered in spiraling Celtic knots. As Isabella placed her hands on the stone and began the third incantation, she felt the power building to an almost overwhelming level. The magical defenses were strengthening with each activation, but she could also sense the enemy forces growing more desperate and violent. 3 stones activated, she reported into a backup communication device Marcus had given her. The barriers are getting stronger. Isabella, listen to me carefully. Marcus's voice came through clearly despite the sounds of battle in the background. The shadow demon has broken through our defensive line. It's heading straight for you. Do not engage it directly. Run to St. Mary's Church immediately. Isabella felt her blood turn to ice. The shadow demon was the creature Professor Chen had warned her about, the one that fed on fear and despair. She could already sense it approaching, a presence so dark and malevolent that it seemed to drain hope from the very air. The church was only a few blocks away, but as Isabella ran through the empty streets, she could feel the temperature dropping around her. Streetlights flickered and died as the shadow demon passed beneath them. When she looked over her shoulder, she saw it, a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to absorb light itself, moving with predatory purpose. St. Mary's Church was a beautiful stone building that had served Salem's community for over 2 centuries. Isabella burst through the heavy wooden doors and immediately felt a sense of sanctuary. The ward stone here was incorporated into the altar itself, a piece of white marble that seemed to glow within a light. As she placed her hands on the altar and began the 4th incantation, Isabella heard the church doors slam shut behind her. The shadow demon had arrived, and she could feel its presence pressing against the sacred space, like a physical weight. You cannot hide in there forever, little witch. A voice spoke directly into her mind, cold and alien. I can taste your fear, and it is delicious. Soon you will join me in the darkness, and your precious wardstones will crumble to dust. Isabella forced herself to concentrate on the spell, pouring all her determination and protective instincts into the words. The altar stone blazed with brilliant white light, and she felt the 4th connection snap into place. The magical defenses around Salem were now almost complete, but she still had 1 stone left to activate. The final ward stone was located at the original site of the witch trials, now a small park with a memorial to the innocent victims. As Isabella prepared to leave the church, she realized that the shadow demon was waiting for her outside. She would have to face it directly if she wanted to complete her mission. Taking a deep breath, Isabella pushed open the church doors and stepped into the night. The shadow demon materialized in front of her, a towering figure of pure darkness that seemed to bend reality around itself. Your ancestors tried to stop my kind once before, the demon whispered, its voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. We killed them all just as we will kill you. Isabella raised the grimoire and felt Eleanor Whitmore's pendant blazing against her skin. My ancestors weren't trying to stop you, she said, surprised by the strength in her voice. They were preparing the way for me. Power flowed through Isabella like nothing she had ever experienced. She could see the threads of magic that connected all 5 wardstones, waiting for her to complete the pattern. The shadow demon lunged at her, but Isabella was no longer just a human with supernatural abilities. She was the living embodiment of 3 centuries of protective magic. Light erupted from her body, pushing back the darkness and revealing the demon's true form, a twisted creature that looked like it had been assembled from nightmares. Isabella raised her hand and spoke a word in the ancient language, and the creature shrieked as it was forced back. The 5th stone, Isabella whispered, understanding flooding through her. I am the 5th stone. She had been the missing piece all along, the human anchor that would allow the protective magic to cover not just Salem but the entire region. As she embraced her role, power flowed outward from her position, connecting with the 4 activated wardstones and creating an unbreakable barrier around the entire area. The shadow demon let out a final scream of rage before dissolving into mist. Around Salem, Isabella could sense the road vampires and werewolves being pushed out by the magical barriers, forced to flee or be destroyed by the purifying energy. Marcus appeared beside her, no longer pale and cold, but glowing with the same warm light that emanated from the wardstones. It's over, he said, gathering her into his arms. You've saved everyone. As the supernatural darkness lifted from Salem, revealing the first hints of dawn on the horizon, Isabella realized that she had found her true calling. She was no longer just a maid who had stumbled into an extraordinary world. She was Isabella Whitmore Martinez, guardian of Salem, and the newest member of the Blackwood Covenant. So what happens now? She asked Marcus as they watched the sun rise over the town they had protected. Marcus smiled, his fangs catching the morning light. Now we go home, And I tell you all the things I've been wanting to say for 3 years, starting with the fact that I've been in love with you since the day you first walked into my house." Isabella laughed, feeling lighter and more complete than she had ever felt in her life. "I think I'd like to hear that story," she said. "We have all the time in the world." Above them, the wardstones pulsed with gentle light, standing sentinel over Salem and its people, protected by the love between a vampire who had chosen humanity and a human who had discovered her supernatural heritage. The Blackwood Covenant had gained its most powerful guardian, and the town would never again be threatened by the darkness that lurked beyond the normal world. As they walked back to the mansion together, Isabella knew that her old life was truly over, but her new life as a protector of the innocent was just beginning. And with Marcus by her side, she was ready for whatever supernatural challenges the future might bring.